Today, regional Australia is another country. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics One Post, covering finance and problem news with a distinctively Australian flavour. Well, I wanted to follow up from last night's live show with Robbie Barwick, where we discussed the question of a public bank and specifically the removal of bank branches in regional Australia. As I mentioned, I just completed another survey, and in fact today what I want to do is to walk through the main results from the survey, which we've run over the last month, trying to get at some of the differences between households in major cities, in the suburbs, and in regional Australia. And there are some substantive differences between those three categories. And as you'll see, this does beg the question again as to why it is that banks are closing branches in the very parts of the country where they're still needed the most, and, by the way, valued the most. So let's have a look at the data that we've got. And we're going to start by looking at how many bank branch visits did you make in the last year. And I've excluded from this particular part of the survey those relating to visiting an ATM. And interestingly, on average, households in regional Australia, and small businesses I included in this survey as well, visited on average 72 times over the last year, which is more than one a week. In the suburban areas, it was 32.3 times. In the average city across Australia, it was just 5.6 times, so very infrequent. And I also wanted to call out Canberra, because Canberra, of course, where a lot of these decisions are being made or not being made, also shows that there, the number of visits to a branch, excluding ATM, was even lower at 3.2% over the last year. The next question related to how many ATM visits did you make over the last year? And on average in regional Australia, it was 11.5. In suburban areas of Australia, 31.5. The average in the city was 56.8, so that's more than one a week. And in Canberra, 31.5. The next question was the average size of the cash withdrawal you made when you went to the branch. In regional Australia, the average was $285 per visit. In suburban areas, $147 per visit. In the average city, $121, and in Canberra, $178. So you can see immediately that in regional areas, people are drawing out large amounts of cash, and as I said just now, more frequently too. We then asked a question specifically of whether the transactions were SME related, and this is showing the proportion of transactions that are actually SME related. And 55.4% of visits to the branch in the regions was connected with a business, whereas in suburban areas it was 32.7%, and in the average city environment just 19.8%, but in Canberra just 3.5%. So you can see here that in regional Australia, businesses and small businesses in particular are very significant users of the branch infrastructure. We then asked a question about whether people had responded to signing up for online banking. And those in regional Australia show that 71.6% of households and businesses in regional Australia have signed up for online banking. In the suburban area, it was a lot higher at 85.9%. And across the city, on average, 92.5%. And in Canberra, it's 97.8%. So the decision makers and those in Canberra are much more aligned to signing up for online banking than regional Australians. Then, of course, the next question is, yes, but are you actually a regular user of online? And by regular, I decided to define it as more than 2 visits to the online services a week. In regional Australia, 27.8% visited their online banking services more than twice a week. In suburban areas, it was more than half at 56.8%. The average city user at 62.6% was even higher. And in Canberra, it was 78.6%. So you can see again that those people in Canberra attached to the decision makers are much more likely to be a regular online banking user than those in the regions. The next question was asking specifically whether people were only digital users of banking services in the last 12 months. In other words, had they never been inside a branch? And only 3.5% of those in regional Australia were truly digital banking users, whereas in suburban areas it was 31.7%, and across the average city, 56.4%. Whereas in Canberra, it was as much higher at 71.3%. So again, you can see the massive contrast between those in the regional areas and those in Canberra, where decisions are or are not being taken. The next thing we looked at was the proportion with digital connectivity issues over the past 12 months, and that can include mobile and also fixed line connectivity issues. And interestingly, in regional areas, more than 71% of households or businesses had some sort of issue with digital connectivity over the past 12 months. In suburban areas, it was 32.8%, and in the average city, just 14.3%. And in Canberra, guess what? Very low at 3.4%. So once again, the decision makers will be assuming that there are no issues with connectivity, despite the fact that in regional Australia, many people have significant issues. And that can, of course, either be to do with mobile connectivity or indeed broadband or other fixed line connectivity. And we also looked at the proportion of people who are interested in regional matters. This is one that Dale Webster asked me to investigate. And not surprisingly, pretty much all of those in regional Australia are interested in regional Australian matters. In the suburbs, 65.8% are actually interested in regional matters, whereas in the city it drops to 34.9%. And what about Canberra? Well, there only 8.9% said they had interest in regional matters. Maybe no surprise. And then we looked at the proportion who'd lived in a regional area at any time, and there, guess what, 100% of people living in regional Australia lived in regional Australia, no surprise. Those in suburban areas, 61% had lived in regional areas at some point. In the average city, just 21%, and in Canberra, 17.9%. So I'm going to suggest again that our decision makers and those connected with them in Canberra are really quite disconnected from what's going on in regional Australia. And then we also asked one other question, and that was the proportion who've been inconvenienced by branch closures in the past year. In regional Australia, 78.5% of households and small businesses have been inconvenienced. That means going to a different branch or having to drive further to do their banking, or not being able to do their banking at all, simply because the branch was shut. 78.5%. In suburban areas, it's 34.7%. In the average city, it's 19.8%. But in Canberra, just 2.3% of households and businesses said that they'd been inconvenienced by branch closures in their area. So here you can see a very significant contrast between those households in regional Australia and those in other areas, and particularly those in Canberra. And I think this is probably the key to understanding why it is that in Canberra there's very little interest amongst politicians and in the local area there to tackle this critical issue. The truth is, many regional businesses and many regional households are being significantly disadvantaged by the poor behaviour of banks as they shut their branches. And of course, they're using the excuse of costs and people migrating to digital. But we've shown in this survey that many people in regional Australia are unable or unwilling to use digital and still require banking services. And of course, as I discussed again with Robbie the other day, the bottom line is this: if you remove banking services from those areas that need them, you actually reduce the economic activity in those regions. You disadvantage people significantly. And yet those people in the decision-making capital of the country in Canberra seem completely disconnected and frankly disinterested. Well, we need to change that. So as we discussed yesterday, time to call the senators and get them to launch that inquiry into regional banking. And we need that inquiry now. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.